At 6, the federal government calls it a growing risk across the country. The volume of crude oil shipped via local railroads is on the rise. Good evening, I'm Heather Herron.
And I'm Mark Mellinger. Much of that oil is coming from North Dakota and heading to the East Coast. The path funnels the toxic traveler directly through its shortest route, Northeast Indiana.
So what does this mean for you and your family's safety? For the past 2 months, 15 Finds Out has been looking for answers.
Adam Widener joins us now with his special report on the hazard traveling through your backyard.
The U.S. Department of Transportation says an increase in crude oil traveling by rail is creating a greater risk for incidents. That's why earlier this year it required railroad companies to tell each state where and how often trains haul large amounts of it. But 15 Finds Out discovered a communications gap between state officials and local first responders. Surprisingly, some emergency responders I spoke with had no idea about the growing threat traveling through their backyard until we began asking questions.
The first I heard about it was from you.
That was Noble County Emergency Management Director Mick Newton's response on October 1st, when 15 Finds Out told him how many trains carry large quantities of crude oil right past his office. To understand the severity of that communications gap, you have to first understand the reason for the increase in crude oil traveling by rail. More of it is coming from the Bakken Shale Formation in North Dakota, headed for the population centers of the East Coast. Rail companies say it's traveling to refineries in high quantities via the most economical option. Since the beginning of last year, oil train derailments have caused major problems across the U.S. and Canada. One organization highlights 10 such accidents in that time frame. On April 30th, a CSX train carrying 105 crude oil tank cars derailed in Lynchburg, Virginia. The highly flammable crude oil caught fire. Emergency crews evacuated 350 people from their houses, and up to 30,000 gallons of petroleum crude oil spilled into a nearby river. And most notably, the disastrous derailment in Quebec, Canada on July 5th, 2013. An unmanned train carrying crude oil derailed, exploded, caught fire, and killed 47 people. 2,000 people had to be evacuated. The dramatic rise in oil trains combined with recent derailments caused the U.S. Department of Transportation to file an emergency order this past May, citing an unsafe condition or unsafe practice for crude by rail causing an imminent hazard. The DOT ordered railroad companies to begin reporting to each state's Emergency Response Commission, telling state officials where trains moving 1 million gallons or more of North Dakota crude oil are going. Rail companies with lines in Northeast Indiana say they've been following that order.
We share information with the state emergency management services across our network.
We are getting information into the hands of emergency first responders and state emergency management agencies.
But the federal order makes other recommendations, saying it's important for local first responders to be as well informed as possible as to the presence of trains carrying large quantities of Bakken crude oil in their area. But when I spoke with emergency management leaders like Newton,
I haven't been notified of any increase through our county.
would you like to know that information?
Well, certainly. And I believe if the state or had aware of that, I would have had the information.
We found proof the state actually did have that information. IT Mate at our sister station, Wish TV in Indianapolis, got a copy of a recent email the Indiana Department of Homeland Security sent to Northern Indiana EMA directors. In it, how often Norfolk Southern's oil trains travel through and where. That information was sent to the state on June 3rd, but the state didn't forward it to EMA directors until October 8th. Ironically, after 15 Finds Out and IT Mate began asking questions. The Federal Railroad Administration has noted those crude by rail stats are public. Still, the Indiana Department of Homeland Security denied our request for copies, saying that information could hurt public safety by creating an opening to terrorist attacks. Because of legal concerns, 15 Finds Out has decided to release only minimal information about Norfolk Southern's crude by rail notifications. Noble and DeKalb counties have at least 13 to 24 million gallons of crude oil traveling through each week, while Whitley and Allen counties have at least 0 to 4 million gallons a week. Leaders with CSX were more forthcoming, telling us 20 to 35 trains, each carrying more than 1 million gallons of North Dakota crude oil, travel on its Garrett line every week. We shared those stats to Newton on October 1st.
Again, nobody's come up with, other than you, of any information like that to me.
We never know actually what we're getting into.
It was a similar story in DeKalb County. EMA Director Roger Powers said he hadn't received any crude by rail notifications from the state, ironically, until the day of our interview.
It's always good for us to know. When we don't know, that's when we get caught sometimes and have to pull back and regroup and think about, how we're going to attack this.
In the end, Newton argues the response would be the same whether they had these statistics or not. Despite the 4-month delay, both Newton and Powers are each thankful they now have the proactive intel and are passing those stats down to first responders, like Auburn Fire Chief Mike Van Zyl.
Since you said something to me about it, I've done some research, and now I think through your efforts and some other folks' efforts, now the state has given our local EMA Director, Homeland Security Office, some vital information that he has passed on to me.
Now, the Indiana Department of Homeland Security just released a statement to us this morning regarding crude oil notifications, saying in part, quote, "This notification was not evaluated as efficiently as it could have been, and as a result was not forwarded to local responders as quickly as IDHS would have liked." The state tells us it will now make sure this information gets to first responders as quickly as possible. So how much crude oil is traveling through your backyard? Make sure you check out this story on Wayne.com. We've posted maps showing where and how often trains travel through. Next Thursday at 6, 15 Finds Out continues investigating the rise in crude oil in our area. You can hear what the railroad companies and the feds are doing to make crude by rail safer. Live in Studio 15, Adam Widener, News Channel 15.
Millions of gallons of crude oil travel through northeast Indiana every week. It's a growing trend we first told you about last week.
And tonight we are taking a closer look at federal regulations that would drastically change how the railroads ship crude oil through our communities. We're also looking into what the railroads are doing voluntarily to make these shipments safer. News Channel 15's Adam Widener continues his exclusive 15 Finds Out investigation about the danger traveling through your backyard.
Oil train derailments have proved to be spectacular and lethal since the beginning of last year. It's the reason the government has proposed new safety measures. But the railroads and their customers say some of the new guidelines could slow down a booming industry that's bringing jobs to northeast Indiana. It's ingrained in northeast Indiana history, said to employ at least 750 people and hiring.
We have a personal reason to want to haul these materials safely.
While the railroads focus on training first responders on crude by rail, leaders in Washington work towards stricter regulations.
Certainly when it comes to safety, we are trying to play catch up.
It's a side effect to booming energy production in this country. More crude oil is being drilled from the Bakken Shale Formation in North Dakota. Much of it passes right through northeast Indiana as the shortest route to East Coast refineries. Since the beginning of 2013, there have been at least 10 major oil train derailments in the U.S. and Canada. Homes have been evacuated, tens of thousands of gallons have spilled into the environment, and one incident in Quebec killed 47 people. In response, federal officials ordered railroads to tell each state where large oil trains are traveling and how often. We first told you last week, after 15 Finds Out started asking questions, the Indiana Department of Homeland Security admitted it delayed giving those stats to local first responders. But federal officials are proposing much more to prevent future accidents. This past summer, regulators laid out safety proposals for trains carrying crude oil and other flammable liquids. They include enhanced braking, beefed up standards for puncture-resistant tank cars, and lower speed limits. The safety regulations could slow speeds from 50 to 40 miles an hour for oil trains that don't have newly enhanced tank cars, and even down to 30 miles an hour for those that don't have enhanced braking. The American Association of Railroads says the industry has voluntarily agreed to reduce some speeds for hazardous trains, down to 40 miles an hour in cities known as high urban threat areas. That would include Indianapolis, but nowhere else in Indiana. But the railroads are pushing back against some other proposals. They oppose a new braking system that would stop all train cars at the same time instead of one by one, and also oppose lower speed limits everywhere, saying these expensive regulations would cost more than their benefit, ultimately hurting the industry.
Sometimes there are unintended consequences in lowering the speed in terms of keeping commodities idling on a network longer. It causes problems other places.
Leaders with Norfolk Southern told 15 Finds Out they support sturdier tank cars, though they wouldn't have to pay for them since they don't own most of the cars.
We are always trying to raise that bar of safety performance. And one of the ways in which we are doing that is pushing for stricter safety standards on these tank cars.
And they could also be hot with electricity.
In the meantime, the railroads are voluntarily boosting training for first responders. CSX recently took its safety train through Indianapolis, teaching crews from across Indiana how to respond to a potential oil train derailment. Auburn Fire Chief Mike Van Zyl says CSX has even paid for some of his firefighters to go through more extensive training in Colorado.
They go out there, it's all hands-on, they spend a week, they come back, and we use that at the local level. They train our firefighters here. We have probably trained more on crude oil than ever before in the last 2 or 3 months.
Leaders from Norfolk Southern gave us a similar story.
We are increasing track inspections along crude oil route. We are providing training to first responders who are asking for that training.
In the end, it's a delicate track for federal regulators, working to prevent a growing risk without stalling an industry said to be driving economic growth.
You're going to see continued focus on the ability to move this traffic without incident. And there's no guarantees ever in a situation. We always want to do better in safety.
Now, CSX leaders tell 15 Finds Out they expect federal officials to make a final ruling on oil train regulations by the end of the year. Which, if any, regulations do you think would make crude by rail safer? We've created a poll on the homepage of Wayne.com where you can weigh in. So what would happen if an oil train would derail in northeast Indiana? Next Thursday at 6, 15 Finds Out will have that answer as we continue our investigative series through your backyard. Live in Studio 15, Adam Widener, News Channel 15.
Northeast Indiana is a major corridor for railroads and certainly no stranger to hazardous shipments and derailments.
One particular product is traveling through at increasingly high rates, crude oil. Explosive and even fatal derailments have brought oil train concerns into the national spotlight. Tonight, 15 Finds Out continues its investigative series by taking a closer look at how emergency crews would respond if an oil train derailed through your backyard.
It's a scenario first responders are preparing for now more than ever. We discovered an oil train derailment could cause major problems in our environment, force you to evacuate your home, and at worst, be deadly. It's a familiar sound for folks across the area, especially in Garrett. According to the Department of Transportation, between 54 and 61 trains travel on this CSX line every day, one of the busiest in northeast Indiana, literally butting up to the backyards of folks living here.
You get used to the trains after a while.
I'm just used to it.
Some days more than others.
Every week, 20 to 35 trains carrying more than 1 million gallons of crude oil travel on this line. It came as a surprise to many, even for a town known as the home of the railroaders.
I personally have not been that aware of crude oil.
I never thought of it, but it is kind of scary.
More crude oil being produced in North Dakota is being shipped through northeast Indiana and across the U.S. Since the beginning of last year, there have been at least 10 major oil train derailments. One incident in Quebec killed 47 people. The trend has caught the attention of federal safety regulators. So far, 15 Finds Out uncovered first responders who were left in the dark regarding oil train statistics and a battle to make oil trains safer.
It's scary to look at.
But Northeast Indiana is no stranger to derailments. Just a couple months ago, a Norfolk Southern train derailed in New Haven. Fortunately, most of the cars were empty. Officials say no chemicals or hazardous materials spilled.
Number one, everybody's lucky.
Other areas across the state haven't been as fortunate. 15 Finds Out dug up federal records showing there have been 6 serious hazmat incidents on Indiana railroads since 2010. Luckily, none has involved crude by rail. But one of the worst accidents happened in Ligonier in March of 2012. More than 200,000 pounds of molten sulfur spilled when a Norfolk Southern train derailed. Some of it caught fire. More than 100 people from 56 homes had to be evacuated.
It is creating a concern that other areas downwind may be affected by any smoke.
But what if that was crude oil? Noble County Emergency Management Director Mick Newton handled the Ligonier incident. He says the local response would be similar no matter what hazardous material derails. First, call railroad leaders who will respond to the derailment, and then
try and get the people out of the danger area.
Newton exclusively showed 15 Finds Out an app EMA directors would use.
And it literally has looked at the direction of the wind and stuff. If you can see this cone shaped, it gives me the possible plume. And this program gives us an idea how far, worst case scenario, to evacuate. In this case, it's out almost 5 miles.
So you're always looking about where is it going to happen.
Auburn Fire Chief Mike Van Zyl says his team has recently trained more on crude oil derailments than ever before. He says if an oil train derailed and caught fire, his crews will have to let it burn.
Defensively, to let something burn is usually the safest for the environment. If we start adding a bunch of foam and a bunch of water to a product and it goes into city sewers, lakes, streams, rivers, waterways, the environmental impact could last for years. If it's mobile cars, we don't have close to the resources to do that, no.
With a greater number of oil trains traveling through places like Fort Wayne, Auburn, and Garrett, federal officials say the risk for these extreme responses is growing.
If it were to happen here in the town of Albion or in a community, that would be my worst nightmare, because the area we would have to evacuate.
Now make sure you click on the story on Wayne.com. We've added extended information on the 6 serious hazmat incidents on Indiana railroads. 15 Finds Out will be tracking proposed regulations aimed at making crude by rail safer in your backyard, and we'll update you with the latest developments as they happen. Live in Studio 15, Adam Widener, News Channel 15.
More crude oil than ever drilled in North Dakota is traveling through northeast Indiana on railroads.
All month, our 15 Finds Out investigative series has focused on the growing risk and the government's response. Tonight, Adam Widener is taking a closer look at how much is traveling directly through Fort Wayne as we continue digging deeper into the threat traveling through your backyard.
Well, much of our series has focused on oil trains traveling through Noble and DeKalb counties. Some of you have asked, what about Fort Wayne? The city has fewer oil trains. Still, emergency crews are preparing for the worst-case scenario.
Worst case anywhere would be a catastrophic loss.
Since the beginning of last year, there have been at least 10 major oil train derailments in the U.S. and Canada. One incident in Quebec killed 47 people. So far, 15 Finds Out has uncovered first responders who were left in the dark regarding oil train statistics, a battle to make oil trains safer, and an emergency plan that could evacuate anyone living up to 5 miles away from an oil train derailment. The vast majority of local oil trains travel on lines that run through Noble and DeKalb counties. According to railroad statistics, 33 to 59 trains carrying 1 million gallons or more of crude oil travel through every week on 2 separate lines. New today, we can tell you between 0 and 4 of these sort of trains travel directly through downtown Fort Wayne every week.
We have seen that uptick in number of tankers coming through.
We caught up with Allen County Emergency Management Director Bernie Byer in September. after a Norfolk Southern train derailed east of New Haven.
I would argue that there's a less of a risk not only for crude, but for all products because the attention the additional crude has received.
Leaders with the Fort Wayne Fire Department say they're currently looking at the potential problems and the risk of one of these trains derailing in our city, and like others have boosted training. Responses Bayer says are essential, with more oil trains traveling through your backyard.
It's the unknowns that make things more dangerous. This has caused people to come together and talk about the issues that might be there, might not be there. That alone makes the community so much safer.
Now make sure you click on this story on Wayne.com if you'd like to see any of our previous stories on local oil trains. 15 Finds Out will have updates once a decision is made on proposed regulations aimed at making crude by rail safer. Live in Studio 15, Adam Widener, News Channel 15.